Yo, yo, yo. What it do, Chicken Stew family? We back in this bad boy with some more good content. Another history lesson for them folks, man. And today, we gonna cover a real good one, right? This is a real good one because they don't talk about this in the history books enough, right? They don't make mention of this specific time in history in the history books enough. You see how I'm about to walk this one down? It's about to be real special because we're going to connect a lot of dots with this one, man. Like, welcome to America, right? The place where you can have land stolen from you, your children stolen from you, your rights stolen from you, and then they'll still turn around and force you to serve the country. They'll turn around, force you to serve the country. And once you served, especially at this time, you are sent back home with nothing but PTSD, war wounds, and more issues. Right, in this video today, we're going to talk about the history, the true Buffalo Soldier story. As a matter of fact, not the history. The true Buffalo Soldier story, and how Theodore Roosevelt used a double standard to cover up who really should be treated, or who really was Superman at the end of this war. He used a racial bias to make people believe that his Rough Riders were the ones who took San Juan Hill. They overtook San Juan Hill, right? In the history books, that's what it tells us. But they don't make mention, or they do make mention. They don't give enough credit to the Buffalo Soldiers, the black and brown folks who served in this war, who took the hill and were forced to return back to the country empty-handed. Oh, not to mention to face more racial segregation and forced relocation. All of this has a starting point, right? We got to understand the foundations of America in order to understand who participated in this war, right? This was the first war that America participated in outside of its home turf. This is the first war where they sailed away, right, to go invade another country after successfully toppling the majority of the nations in America, right? This is the most interesting part. And we're going to go into it, right? So there's a lot of people who don't know about this war, and I'm 100% sure of that. I've asked some folks already, like, yo, you learned a lot about the Spanish-American War? And people be like, Spanish-American War? Usually, they'll go from the American Revolution to the Civil War. They skip a whole time period. And then from the Civil War on to World War I and on to World War II. But most people don't know about this one, right? So let's talk about it. First, let's talk about the Rough Riders, right? Who were the Rough Riders? Well, the Rough Riders, it was a nickname given to the 1st United States Volunteer Cavalry, right? One of 3 such regiments raised in 1898 for the Spanish-American War. And it was the only one to see combat, right? Not true. The United States Army was small, understaffed, and disorganized in comparison to its status during the American Civil War roughly 30 years prior. Right, this right after the Civil War. Black folks fought on both sides of that war too. This is why it's so funny, and no one benefited. No one was able to benefit from that war who looked like me and other people of color. There was no top takers coming out of this war, right? We were forced and pushed more into poverty. This was the whole point of serving in the Spanish and American War to begin with, where a lot of people were looking for jobs, right? Opportunity, right? This is fresh out the Civil War, fresh out of emancipation. You know, black people are free now, quote unquote, right? Following the sinking of the USS Maine, President William McKinley needed to muster a strong ground force swiftly, which he did by calling for 125,000 volunteers to assist in the war. The U.S. had gone to war in opposition to Spanish colonial policies in Cuba, which was then torn by a rebellion. Right, there was some beef going on in Cuba, and America was supporting the rebels. We were supporting the rebels. The regiment was also nicknamed Wood's Weary's Walkers for its commander, Colonel Leonard Wood. This reflected their dissatisfaction that despite being cavalry, they ended up fighting in Cuba as a light infantry since their horses were not sent there with them, right? This is what America was used to, going to war on horseback though, right? Cowboys and whatnot. Indians were the first cowboys, right? Black people were the first cowboys, the first folks to tame the horses, ride the horses. That's why they called them horse thieves, right? We were used to that on American soil. So this war was very important and very significant because this is the first one we fought outside of our terms, right? Outside of the American norm, right? And it's kind of like proof that there's no other way to put it, that again, we are the cultivators, we are the teachers, we are the owners, we are the winners, the warriors, the fighters. We are everything that this world tells us that we are not, because without our horses we were still able to win this war, and not on Theodore's terms, on our terms. The buffalo, I keep calling them black buffaloes, but the buffalo soldiers. So let's continue. Wood's second in command was a former assistant secretary of the Navy, Theodore Roosevelt, who later became president. As we all know, a strong advocate for the Cuban War of Independence. When Wood was promoted to become commander of the 2nd Cavalry Brigade, the regiment became known as Roosevelt's Rough Riders. That term was borrowed from Buffalo Bill, who called his traveling Western show Buffalo Bill's Wild West and Congress of Rough Riders of the World. Right, the original plan called for a regiment to be composed of frontiersmen from the Indian Territory. Right, this is where you get the formation of the Buffalo Soldiers, because they patrolled the Indian Territory. Actually, is very interesting because it takes us back to the Trail of Tears, and how even during the Trail of Tears, you know, we were used to be put against our own people. Right after the Trail of Tears pushed off our land, or the people being pushed off their land, right, being forced to relocate in other places, losing access to whatever wealth they may have had. You ain't got no funds, you ain't got no money, you ain't got no guns. The only way to get back from that is to accept what they're offering to join the war. The first war that we stepped into was the Civil War, right? That led into people being free. This is after the Trail of Tears. Once the Civil War went down, black people were only more poorer. Like, we were more poorer, more pushed into the slums, like living without. And the only opportunities that were being provided to us as time continued to go on was going to war. Right? And I have a timeline chart to break this stuff down too. Is war. War is what they offered the folks as a get out of poverty free card. And every time we shook the hand with the devil, right, we ended up regretting the actions that we partook in, right, because of the trauma, right? We got to bring this all back to the trauma, right, and the lack of economic success for the black man in America. Right? We fighting their battles, doing things for them when they've done nothing but take from us. Right? It's so weird when you look at it. Right? But they got folks from the Indian Territory. They got folks. Where we went? They got folks from the Indian Territory. They got folks from New Mexico, the Arizona Territory, Oklahoma Territory, folks from Ivy League athletes, Glee Club singers, Texas Rangers, right? These are the people that was, I guess, patrolling Texas, the Texans, Native Americans, and many, many more. Like, it was just a melting pot of peoples. A lot of these peoples who have different backgrounds, obviously, but have different perceptions of America at this current time, right? So now that we have a understanding of that, let's check out the Buffalo Soldiers, right? So what they gonna tell us about these Buffalo Soldiers? Right, who were the Buffalo Soldiers? Right, this was a United States Army regiment composed exclusively of black American soldiers, right? Formed during the 19th century to serve on the American frontier. On September 21st, 1866, the 10th Cavalry Regiment was formed at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. The nickname Buffalo Soldiers was purportedly given to the regiments by the Native American tribes who fought against them during the American Indian Wars. And the term eventually became synonymous with all of the African American regiments that were established in 1866, including the 9th Cavalry, 10th Cavalry, the 24th Infantry, 25th Infantry, and the 38th Infantry. Buffalo Soldiers, all black folks. Right? Why would the Indians, and this is something that I was like, yo, very interesting. They called them Buffalo Soldiers. Why is that? Right, and not only that, they just told us that they rallied up all of these different bands of peoples, including Native Americans, to serve with the Rough Riders. Now, you got Native Americans fighting against the Rough Riders and Native Americans in the Rough Riders. And then the Native Americans that's fighting against the Rough Riders, called the Buffalo Soldiers, they gave them that name assuming because of maybe how savage they were. It's very interesting. Right? Why would they give them the name Buffalo Soldiers? Right? How do we connect them back to quote unquote Native Americans? And like I said, in these American Indian wars, right, people were being forced to fight against each other. Throughout all of these wars, tribes were fighting against each other on behalf of two sides, the French and the British, right? The British and the American, right? On the behalf of the Civil War, the Confederates and the, I forgot the name of the other one. We're going to call them Democrats. Right? It's always fighting on two sides against one another, but do they ever win out of these situations? No, because at the end of the day, all they ended up doing was forcing these folks on the reservations and taking over the land, right? Enslaving everybody and then sending everybody to work on plantations on behalf of their own personal gain. So this is why I say, like, it's very, 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 very interesting, right? When we talking about these wars or even groups of folks like the Buffalo Soldiers and who they were, right? We technically talking about more indigenous folks here, man. Just take a good look at them, and you can practically tell in a great majority. It's amazing, man. It's beautiful to look at it too, because this is history. Right? This is true history right here. Right? Different folks from different places fighting alongside one another on behalf of the American government. But at the end of the day, right, they still fought against their brethren to get their name. Right? It's kind of a testament to what they've been putting the people in America through since they got here. Right? They just told us that the American Indian Wars, right, it was from 1609 to 1890 something. That was the last American. Jesus Christ, that's a long time. I'm trying to find it again for y'all, but I got the chart though. Right? American Indian Wars lasted from the 1600s all the way up until the 1890s or the 1860s, right? That's a long time. You know, that they had to get rid of all of the people on the land to be able to make this land resourceful before they was like, all right, we're going to go and start taking over other places now. When you think about it, right, they divided, conquer, and then used us to go and divide other and conquer other places, right? That was the strategy. And they don't give us no credit for even for none of this conquering. It's crazy. Like, it be blowing my mind in real life. So what do I mean by not giving folks credit? Well, in Roosevelt's own book, right, The Rough Riders, check out what he said. This man said, and we're going to quote, "Among the rest were perhaps a score of colored infantrymen. But as it happened at this particular point, without any of their officers, no troops could have behaved better than the colored soldiers had behaved so far. But they are, of course, peculiarly dependent upon their white officers." Right? Occasionally, they produce non-commissioned officers who can take the initiative and accept responsibility precisely like the best class of whites. But this cannot be expected normally, nor is it fair to expect it. Like, a straight jab at the Buffalo Soldiers, when they was the ones who took the hill. So what do you mean? Right? We are dependent upon our white officers. Y'all depended on us. They were entirely dependent on us to win this war. They couldn't do it alone. First off, why recruit all these people if that's the case? Why recruit colored people if that's the case? That don't make no sense. Not to me. Hell nah. But again, you know, this is just a clear representation of the hate that they give. They hate so damn much. They don't ever want folks to walk away with their heads high and their chest pecked out like, yeah, we did that. Just like how we did everything else, including help these folks survive when they first got here. We've helped them thrive and even survive through wars up until the 1900s. So this is out of his own book. He said himself, we are dependent upon our white officers, right? We're going to break that down a little bit, right? Heard you, Theo, right? So I got this article from history.com, right? We're going to talk about the Buffalo Soldiers at San Juan Hill and what really happened, right? So, published by Ivan Roman, some later accounts of the battle, including Teddy Roosevelt's, downplayed the black troopers' crucial role in the U.S. victory. It says, and this was published in 2022, y'all, right? They this stuff is out there, man. For you to go and embrace your ancestors, the information is out there. Go read, go learn, go do some research. It's fun. I love it. I love it here, right? It says it remains one of the most mythologized images of the Spanish-American War. Theodore Roosevelt charging on horseback, leading his Rough Riders volunteers up Cuba's San Juan Hill through the smoke and chaos of battle to claim a decisive victory. Right? This painted, whitewashed image with the only black guy getting popped and dropping. Right? That is so crazy. Right? When I saw this, I'm like, yo, like if a picture could tell 1,000 words, I could see how easy it was for them to rewrite history, because they just put the pictures out. And that's enough to create a perception within itself. Why are you the only one with a horse? They said they couldn't get horses over there. Like, things like that, it just don't make no sense. But let's talk about it, right? Carefully crafted by Roosevelt himself, it is an image that raised his public profile and helped catapult him toward the White House. This is what helped him become president. Bolster your image. Right? The same thing that John Smith did, the same thing that Benjamin Church did, right? This is the same things that each of these colonizers have done when it came to dealing with our people, or to just obtain success for themselves. John Smith, colony in Americas was not like that. Benjamin Church, the Virginia colonies and all of them was not like that. The New England colonies wasn't like that to begin with. No. You want to bolster your image to obtain some type of clout or camaraderie, right? Clout, if I pronounce the second word right, clout. They do it for clout. It's not exactly accurate. Right, a combination of savvy public relations and racial bias overemphasized the 40-year-old Roosevelt's combat role, while downplaying the bravery and contributions of the black troops, known as Buffalo Soldiers, who served alongside white soldiers on that same battlefield. Right, in his book about the war, Roosevelt called them shirkers, but for many historians, they stand among the hardest fighting heroes of the 3-week war. Right, and they talking about from this book right here, but I tried to find that part, but we couldn't find it. But he threw enough dirt in this first part enough to let us know, like, yo, you not trying to give folks credit for anything, right? To say that a man or grown men who are well experienced in war, more experienced than you are, needed chaperones just to go to war. We was your chaperones on our countryside. Your grandparents couldn't have done it without us. All right, and that's why you got to think about these things, man. When you learn history, and you got to like clock it on a chronological structure. Like, all right, this happened, that happened, this happened, that happened. If this is the first war we fighting outside the American soil, that means the people fighting this war, if not have experience with the previous wars, or are descendants from the people who served in the previous wars. This tells us that these same people that they sending out to the wars is the same peoples that they were conquering or enslaving. So you winning these overseas battles because of these same people. But you don't want to give them no credit. Thug life, man. The hate you give is crazy. It's crazy. So yeah. Where was we at? Yeah, he called them Shrakers, but for many historians, they stand among the hardest fighting heroes of the 3-week war. In their push to capture the strategically important city of Santiago de Cuba, some 8,000 Americans battled for the 2 nearby hills of San Juan Heights, including Roosevelt's volunteer regiment and some 1,250 black soldiers. Unlike in most U.S. wars, the fighting was an integrated effort. Regulars, volunteers, blacks, whites to take claim to this, right? Roosevelt wanted war, right? He was a bloodthirsty, war-hungry fiend, right? He was fiending, right? He was a blue blood former New York police commissioner. He purchased guns, ammunition, and other equipment and readied the Navy's vessels for foreign conflict. According to the biographer Henry Pringle, these moves reflected Roosevelt's general lust for war. In 1897, Roosevelt, who supported American expansionism, wrote to a friend, "I should welcome almost any war, for I think this country needs one." Right? He was an advocate for American expansionism. So if he was out here during Manifest Destiny, he would have been one of them folks that was like, yeah, let's take the Indian land. And while we at it, let's enslave them. Or matter of fact, let's get them to work for us. Right? And what other way would these people work better for us than would it be to send them to war? Right? Put their lives on the line for this country. We done took everything from them. If they want to get it back, they're going to have to fight for it. Right? It's like that mentality is crazy, man, because we still dealing with it up until this day. It's crazy. Roosevelt got his wish in February 1898 after the USS Maine battleship exploded in Havana Harbor and sank, killing more than 260 officers and sailors, to which I think was rigged. Right, while the cause was never definitely determined, the incident hiked American tensions with Spain over its brutal treatment of Cubans resisting their colonial rule. Roosevelt called the Maine explosion a dirty act of treachery, and the Spanish needed to answer for it. What I think is that, something happened to where this ship exploded, right? It could have been rigged, right? And they did this so that way they can take control of Cuba. They backed the rebels, supported them in the war, and once the war was over, the rebels were able to take control, and America embedded its influence. So now Cuba is no longer controlled by Spain. It is now controlled by America. Not only do we have the Mexican territory, we now got Cuba, and we also got Puerto Rico and anything else that Spain may control over here on this side. Right? They took control over it. That's all that was. They took control. And it's just like if the British and the Spanish were fighting for control over Cuba. The same things would have went down. The same people would have got enslaved. All of the same stuff would have still happened. It's just that they want to be able to exploit whatever resources are on the country, right? Remain within the country. And once this happened, once the Spanish and American War was over, America found his foothold in Cuba. It's crazy. It's like a coup in a sense, right? A coup. And check out this image, man. Look at these buffalo soldiers. Right, these copper-colored buffalo soldiers. When Congress declared war in that April, he resigned his position and wasted no time forming the first U.S. Voluntary Cavalry Regiment, known as the Rough Riders. It featured a diverse mix of athletes, miners, cowboys, upper-class gentlemen, Native Americans, prospectors, and others. Impressed by black soldiers' service in the Union Army during the Civil War, Congress created 6 all-black cavalry and infantry regiments in 1866, 1 year after the conflict ended. And it wasn't, and let's just clear this up. This has nothing to do with being impressed by how they conducted themselves in the Civil War. This is how they were able to segregate black folks from white folks amongst the Rough Riders. This was a segregation. This was an attempt to segregate. We're going to keep these people separate, right? But at the same time, give them some type of title, in a sense, make folks feel important. This is my take on it. But it was also an attempt to segregate. He later consolidated into 4 regiments, the 9th, 10th Cavalry, and the 24th and 25th Infantry. Black troops served mostly on the western frontier, helping build infrastructure, protect white settlers, and fight Native Americans, fight their own brethren, right? Their own brethren, right? This is the same things like with the British back in the Iroquois, or the Iroquois back in the British, and the Americans back in Massachusetts, or we're going to say the Narragansetts, or the Wampanoags, back in them folks, the Mohicans. The Mohicans, right? Because the Mohicans and the Iroquois, they went to war against one another because of this colonial separation. right? So if you get where I'm going with this, these black troops or these Buffalo Soldiers or Native Americans, right, we're going to connect the dots, were branched into their own group, put on the land to rebel and fight against their own people. Again, these black Buffalo Soldiers, they needed work. They were poor. They needed jobs. This was after the Civil War. So they needed money. This was the reason for serving. Not because they loved the country. Not because they loved Theodore Roosevelt. Because they needed to survive. They needed something to do. Let's get that clear, right? The Buffalo Soldiers name came from the Plains Indians, who likened their curly, dark hair to buffalo fur and their fierceness in fighting to the mighty creature they revered. This is crazy, yo. It's so crazy, right? Yeah, them folks had curly, dark hair too as well. Especially folks like the Shoshone or the Powhatan folks from the Powhatan Confederacy over here in the Southeast, man. All that curly hair, dark hair, all of that. Saying it resembles the buffalo fur and their fierceness to fighting the buffaloes. They call them Buffalo Soldiers, right? So crazy, man. They just make up anything, right? Curly hair is nothing like buffalo fur. While soldiering on behalf of a government that had abolished slavery only a few years earlier, black troops endured discrimination in the army, repressive Jim Crow segregation, and violent attacks from civilians, many of whom opposed the idea of black men with guns. Right? Check this. Military officials assumed that black troops had a higher tolerance for tropical climates and immunity to tropical diseases. They saw them as ideal soldiers to deploy to Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines to help rout the Spanish. Used and abused. Man, because they couldn't take the heat. They wanted to stay up out their kitchen, put the people on the line. Look at this. Blackface. These damn artists. Right, this is crazy. So we got to understand them, who these Buffalo Soldiers are. Right, the inhabitants of the land, man. Moors, Maroons, Seminole, Aboriginal, whatever you want to call it. All of these people wanting the same. Right, they all wanting the same. Fighting the white man's cause, fighting the white man's war. Yeah, me Duke. Like, that's all it is, right? We gotta understand, and these Buffalo Soldiers, they held their own though. Despite what Theodore Roosevelt said, they held their own. If it was not for them, they would have never took San Juan Hill. Right? Look, Roosevelt did not get to the top of San Juan Hill until the fighting was over, said Jerry Tusil, The Roughest Riders, The Untold Story of the Black Soldiers in the Spanish-American War. He's the author of that book. Right? But of course, waiting up there were 6 hand-picked reporters by him. They gave him the big reception. The media loved him because he was a colorful character and an adventurer. He was great copy. Right? Reporters on the scene helped burnish his legend. The well-known fiction writer and award-winning correspondent Richard Hardin Davis, whom Roosevelt had befriended before the war, wrote how during the ascent of Kettle Hill, the ambitious lieutenant colonel on horseback lunged from behind the regular troops to speed their advance, and how he galloped repeatedly between rifle pits to inspire black soldiers and the Rough Riders alike. However, no one who saw Roosevelt take that ride expected he would finish it alive, Davis breathlessly reported. It looked like foolhardiness, but as a matter of fact, set the pace with his horse and inspired his men. Watching Roosevelt, he added, made you feel that you would like to cheer. Roosevelt later commissioned a painting by our own artist Frederick Remington of this charge up the hill. It was a fictional image of a cowboy soldier. right? No one can tell whether it was the Rough Riders or the black men of the Ninth Cavalry who came forward with their greater courage to offer their lives in the service of the country, right? The Buffalo Soldiers became a symbol of hope, right? And check this out. He said the Negroes had little at the turn of the century to help sustain our faith in ourselves, except the pride that we took in the 9th and 10th Cavalry, the 24th and 25th Infantry, wrote Rayford Logan, a seminal African-American historian. Many Negro homes had prints of the famous charge of the colored troops up San Juan Hill. They were our Ralph Bucci, Marion Anderson, Joe Louis, and Jackie Robinson. So folks have the real image, right? There's a real image of who really marched up that hill. We're going to talk about it, though. You see me? I love doing my research. I went and got this right here. This article. I forgot where I got it from. I know it's from some congressional website. And they linked me to a college. But what it is a thesis of the role of the Buffalo Soldiers during the Spanish and American War, right? The author is LCDR Reuben L. Wright of the U.S. Navy. Performing organizations, the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Approved for public release, distribution unlimited. Right, it's about to get real, right? This is a real good article. So for the folks who want to get their hands on this, man, we're going to link it below. Right, so let's continue what we're going to go through. The role of the Buffalo Soldiers during the Spanish and American War. This study documents the history of the 9th and 10th Cavalry during the Spanish and American War. This study's focus is on employment and deployment on the 9th and 10th Cavalry during the battles of Las Guaymas and San Juan Hill, Kettle Hill. The 9th and 10th Cavalry were vital units in the Spanish and American War. Previous historians failed to point out in detail how the 9th and 10th Cavalry were a significant force in the Spanish and American War. History records tend to lean towards Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders as the only heroes of the war, right? But this thesis concludes that the 9th and 10th Cavalry fought side by side with Teddy and the Rough Riders and received very little, if any, credit for their outstanding courage and bravery.